Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Monday, so it's vlog day about Willow. It's coming in a little late. We've had a long day. Willow had PT this morning, and then right after that she had her nurse here from 9 to almost 3, so it's been a long day. I do want to first say thank you so much for all your positive feedback about last week's video. I really appreciate it. You guys have been amazing. Thank you for being honest with me and saying how much you felt through the video and how it answered some questions. And thank you for asking questions too, because that's what this is all about. So I want to just jump right into the next phase for vlog number 2. And we will talk about what happened with Willow 10 days after her transplant. So on day 9, I had noticed one of her liver numbers. There's 3 very important ones that my husband and I follow. I had kept a journal and I would write down all of her labs so that I could see visually, if I opened it, what was fluctuating, what the nurses and the doctors decided to do that day. So if anything happened, I can kind of go back and say, hey, do you think this is what affected that? And it just helped me, feel like I was doing something. It just really helped to write notes. So if you're stuck in the hospital, get yourself a little journal and just, write notes. It helps. So anyway, one of those numbers kind of went up a little bit instead of coming down. So I questioned it, and the attending that night was like, oh, we're not gonna worry about it. Sometimes those numbers will fluctuate. Things are still changing and going on with her body, so that's normal. Let's not stress about that. So I said, okay. Went to bed that night. Next morning we had rounds, and Willow was getting her labs done, I think, every 4 hours at that point still. So her 6 a.m. labs had come in. It takes about an hour to get her labs back. So during rounds, right before rounds, I had looked at them, and they went over everything that they were gonna do, and they wanted to, she had an NG tube at that point, so they wanted to put a little Pedialyte in her belly and see if she could tolerate it, and then if she could, they were gonna try to put a little formula in her belly and see if she could tolerate it. So nobody had mentioned her liver numbers. So I was like, hey, one of her numbers is, it's going up again. Are we gonna do anything? Like, when are we concerned about that? So the attending for the morning shift, she pulled out her phone and she looked at Willow's numbers from the night before and that morning, and she was like, well, it's not like a big bump, let's not stress about it. Numbers fluctuate, just like the evening attendant had told me. So I was like, okay, well, when do we worry about it? She was like, well, I don't think we'll have a problem. Don't stress, don't stress, don't stress. So later that afternoon, Willow took a nap, so I ran downstairs to get some lunch. I came back up because in the PICU, you're not allowed to eat anything in there, and really you're not supposed to drink, but they let me bring drinks in anyway. So I had come back up from having lunch, and there was an ultrasound tech in there taking ultrasounds of her liver. So I asked the nurse what's going on, and she's like, her afternoon numbers, they went up. So the attending decided to call for an ultrasound just to ease your mind. It's no big deal, it's just to ease your mind. I was like, okay. So I text my husband and let him know, because he was up at home and that was 98 miles away. So I was just, giving him a heads up just in case I needed him to come down. And then the attending and the resident come running in the room. The attending is on a phone, and she's like, I'm gonna fix this, I'm gonna fix this. We're getting it taken care of, we're getting it taken care of. Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. So of course now I'm worried. And I text my husband again, you need to get down here. So when she gets off the phone, she tells me something's wrong. The surgeon who actually put the liver in Willow was headed up there to look at the ultrasound while the ultrasound was going, and she was calling the IR. The IR is like the OR, but not as invasive. So I'm like, well, what's going on? And she's like, I'm not 100% sure, but it looks like from the readings that her hepatic artery, which is the main artery of the liver, isn't getting blood flow, or a lot of blood flow. So of course that's not good. The attending comes up and he's looking at it and he's like, we gotta get her to the IR. Call the IR, who's down there? I wanna know who's doing this. I'm gonna tell them what I want them to do. So she goes down to the IR. My husband got there right before I went down too, thank God. And when they were done, it took a couple hours. The surgeon came upstairs to the PICU and she spoke to my husband and I, and she said she went in with a wire, and what she was going to do was put heparin, which is, it gets out clots, right onto the clot that was in her hepatic artery so that her blood would flow. But they put a dye in the heparin so that they can see it on the monitors. And when she pushed a little bit of the dye in, instead of going right where she wanted it, it kind of spread out a few places, and that's not good. So hospital protocol is if they see that, they need to come right out. They cannot proceed because it can be dangerous. So that's what they did. So she was immediately put back on the transplant list. She was priority 1A again, and they kept the tube down her throat because if they called later that night and was like, hey, we have a liver, she was going right down to the OR for another transplant. So it was a really hard day, night, stressful, irritated. I felt my voice was not heard because I had asked multiple times. I had that mom feeling that something was wrong and nobody was listening. So it was at that point that I realized I'm gonna start putting my foot down when I think they should be doing something. Because at the end of the day, I'm her advocate, I'm her voice. I know I don't have a PhD and I'm not a doctor, but if I feel like something's not right, I'm gonna make sure that they hear me and that they actually do something, because maybe this could have been prevented. Who knows? So she went about a week. She was pretty much sedated the whole week. They finally took the tube out and she was, you know, very hoarse and upset, clearly. She didn't want to have any tubes anymore. She was ripping out her NG tubes. So her surgeon was like, well, we're just gonna keep her on the list, still as a 1A, we'll just play it by ear. They kept telling me, you know, it's okay that the artery is clotted off because we've had this happen to other transplant patients that are even bigger than her, and they go like 20 years before they even need another liver. So it was back and forth, back and forth. Finally, we moved from the west wing of the PICU to the east wing of the PICU, which is a huge step in recovery because that means you're one step closer to going home. And in the east wing PICU, you have your own bathroom and you can eat in there because it's still like an OR, but it's not an OR. It's a smaller room and everything. So that was really nice to not have to walk all the way out of the PICU, go to the restroom, come back to the PICU, call the nurse's office and ask if I can come in. And so that was really nice. And then a couple weeks after that, she moved to the peds floor, which is an even bigger step because the next step is to go home. So she had spent 5.5 weeks in the PICU. We were really close to getting home, like fingers crossed. July 4th, that evening was the night. They had set everything up. The nurses were teaching my husband and I how to do proper care for like her PICC line and making sure we understood which medicines went in the fridge, which didn't, the whole order of everything. It was like 2 pages long of just medicine. It was crazy. And on July 3rd, she had her labs drawn, and I think at that time they were every 12 hours. And her numbers were through the roof. I'm talking like 2000s. And these are numbers, 2 of them are supposed to be between 0 and 50, and 1 is supposed to be between 0 and 22. And they were in the thousands. So they were like, we gotta do this, we're gonna get imaging, more labs, another biopsy, and she's not going home tomorrow. So yeah, we were really stressed out. They were pushing steroids into her IV. They were just throwing everything that they could. Nobody had an idea what was going on. A couple days later, a doctor that had been with us since we got there came up and she was the attending that day, and she said, you know, I've been gone for 10 days. I was on a small vacation. I've come back. I was reading up on Willow, and I was like, what is going on? I just want you to know, after rounds today, my entire focus today is going to be on Willow and getting her right and figure out what's going on. And I was like, oh, thank God. So she came back later that day and she said, I just want you to know, I've read everything, I've gone through everything. You know, that little girl's giving everybody a heart attack. They didn't know what's going on. I am about to go into a room, and I have 3 microscopes set up. One of them has her original liver biopsy in it. One has her donor liver from shortly after her transplant, and one has a biopsy from her donor liver that she just had a few days ago. So I'm gonna go look at those and I'll be back. About an hour later, she came back and she said, okay, I've been doing this for a long time, and I want you to know I don't normally say this. It's not a medical term, but I'm gonna say this to you. I looked at all her biopsies and they look funny. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? And she said, I'm not 100% sure. I don't do biopsies. That's not my thing. That's why somebody else in the hospital gets paid to look at that. But I've looked at enough to kind of know what I'm looking at. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that her biopsies look funny. I'm gonna get to the bottom of this, but I'm gonna need some blood. So they took more blood from her, and a few weeks, yes, weeks, because some of these tests take that long to do, came back, and I can't even remember it. You'd have to ask my husband the name of the antibody. It's a number and a letter and a bunch of numbers. Anyway, that one came back positive. Everything else came back negative, but that came back positive. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? And she's like, well, it's a very, very, very rare antibody that most people don't make, and we usually don't see this happening in liver transplants. So of course, me and my husband tried to look it up, and we basically found 6 other people to ever have this. So Willow is literally one of 7 people to have this type of rejection. Let that sit in. 1 of 7. I have better odds of hitting the Mega Millions with a Powerball. 1 of 7. And this antibody is not tricked by her anti-rejection medications, so it knows her donor liver is not hers. So therein lies the problem. So they give her IVIG, and she gets that right now. She gets that every 3 weeks. It was a couple times a week, and then it was once a week, and then every other week, and now we're down to every 3 weeks. IVIG is the antibodies of 2,000 different donors hyper mixed up and put into a bag, and slowly, so slowly, pushed into her PICC line through an IV. I'm talking very slowly. It takes like 5 hours for a bag that's like, I don't know, that big. And that's not even all the way full. And the job of these antibodies is to find the rare antibodies that she makes. They're on a seek and destroy mission to destroy those antibodies that she continues to make. So finally, they let us go home on August 4th, hallelujah, with the promise that we wouldn't hightail it to Texas, where my husband had military orders. So we had to stay in California another 4 weeks so they could give her some more treatments, get everything set up for Dallas Children's, and just make sure she was good to go. So I'm gonna end that right here. Thank you so much for watching again. I will get back into this next Monday. I appreciate you guys being here with me and letting me get this out. If you have any questions about Willow, you can always leave a comment down below, or you can find me on Facebook. I will put the link to Willow's page down in the description box. And if you liked this video, make sure you hit the like button. And if you don't already, make sure you subscribe, and if you hit the bell, you'll get notifications when I send up new videos. Anyway guys, I hope you have a great evening. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.